Hello and welcome to your ultimate guide for your HESI A2 exam. My goal today is give you everything that you need to understand the full concepts, master them, and walk you through the HESI A2 exam with total confidence. In this video we will cover cellular metabolism, cardiovascular physiology, circulatory dynamics, physical principles, English grammar. With over 100 plus success stories, we have proven our videos will help you pass your exam on the first attempt. And remember, our website helps you to practice your HESI A2 exam with our practice questions, timed mock exams and study guides. You will find the link in the description below. So let's get started.
Question 1. Where in the cell does glycolysis take place? Your options are A. Mitochondrial matrix, B. Cytoplasm, C. Inner mitochondrial membrane, D. Nucleus. Which one is it? Pause the video if you need more time. The correct answer is B. Cytoplasm. B is correct because glycolysis occurs in the cytoplasm of the cell, where glucose is split into two molecules of pyruvate. This first stage of cellular respiration produces a small net gain of ATP and does not. A is wrong because the mitochondrial matrix is the site of the Krebs cycle, which comes after glycolysis and respiration. Glycolysis itself takes place outside the mitochondria entirely, before pyruvate enters for further breakdown to release energy. C is wrong because the inner mitochondrial membrane is the site of the electron transport chain and oxidative phosphorylation. These steps come after glycolysis and the Krebs cycle, not before in the breakdown of glucose to release ATP. D is wrong because the nucleus stores DNA and is the site of transcription, but no steps of cellular respiration occur inside the nucleus. Glycolysis takes place in the cytoplasm and is unrelated to nuclear activity in any way. Cellular respiration extracts energy from glucose and stores it as ATP. To understand it deeply, you need a mental map of where each stage physically occurs inside a eukaryotic cell. The pathway runs in three sequential stages. Glycolysis occurs in the cytoplasm. The citric acid cycle runs in the mitochondrial matrix. The electron transport chain is embedded in the inner mitochondrial membrane. The mitochondrion has two key compartments, the matrix enclosed by the inner membrane and the inner membrane itself, whose folded cristae expand its surface area. Glycolysis, by contrast, happens entirely outside the mitochondrion, out in the cytosol. Glycolysis is evolutionarily ancient. It predates mitochondria by billions of years, which is why its enzymes are soluble proteins floating in the cytosol. One glucose yields a net 2 ATP and 2 NADH, and the entire process requires absolutely no oxygen. The most tested trap is misplacing a stage. If a question mentions splitting glucose, no oxygen needed, or first stage, that points to the cytoplasm. Any mention of the matrix or inner membrane points you inside the mitochondrion. Question 2. Which factor would tend to increase systemic arterial blood pressure? Your options are A. Vasoconstriction of arterioles, B. Decreased cardiac output, C. Decreased blood volume, D. Vasodilation of arterioles. Take a second. Which answer would you pick? The correct answer is A. Vasoconstriction of arterioles. A is correct because vasoconstriction of arterioles increases systemic vascular resistance throughout the body. With cardiac output and blood volume held constant, the increased resistance raises arterial pressure, which is why vasoconstrictors are used to treat shock. B is wrong because decreased cardiac output reduces the volume of blood ejected by the heart per minute. Lower cardiac output, with other factors held constant, tends to lower arterial blood pressure rather than raise it. C is wrong because decreased blood volume, such as from hemorrhage or dehydration, reduces venous return and stroke volume. The result is a lower cardiac output and a lower arterial blood pressure, not an increase in pressure. D is wrong because vasodilation of arterioles decreases systemic vascular resistance throughout the circulation. The reduced resistance allows blood to flow more easily through arterioles and capillaries, which lowers arterial blood pressure rather than raising it. Blood pressure in the systemic arteries comes down to a simple physical relationship. Two main levers control it: how much blood the heart pumps per minute, and how much resistance the vessels offer to that flow. Cardiac output multiplied by systemic vascular resistance gives a working approximation of mean arterial pressure. Push more blood into the system, narrow the vessels, or do both, and pressure climbs. Arterioles are the small muscular vessels just upstream of capillaries. When their smooth muscle contracts, the lumen narrows dramatically. Because resistance scales with the inverse fourth power of radius, even a modest narrowing produces a large jump in resistance and forces pressure upstream to rise. The key exam skill is knowing the direction each lever moves pressure, increasing cardiac output, constricting arterioles, or raising blood volume all push pressure up. The opposite moves lower it. Test writers mix these levers specifically to catch directional confusion. When a question asks which factor raises or lowers blood pressure, identify whether it changes cardiac output, vascular resistance, or blood volume. Then follow the direction. That logic covers the vast majority of blood pressure questions you will encounter. Question 3. Which of the following best describes resistance in an electric circuit? Your options are A. Charge stored on a capacitor. B. Voltage produced by a battery. C. Total mass of the conductor. D. Opposition to flow of current. Before I reveal it, which one do you think is right? The correct answer is D. Opposition to flow of current. D is correct because resistance is the opposition to the flow of electric current in a conductor of any kind in an electrical circuit. Higher resistance reduces the current for a given applied voltage across the resistor. A is wrong because charge stored on a capacitor in a circuit relates to capacitance rather than to resistance in the circuit. Capacitance describes how much charge a component can hold per unit of voltage applied across. B is wrong because voltage produced by a battery is the electromotive force of the battery, which is not the same as resistance in the circuit. Voltage drives current through the circuit, while resistance is the property. C is wrong because the mass of the conductor is unrelated to its resistance in any electrical circuit at all in physics. Resistance of a conductor depends on the material, the length, the cross-sectional area, and resistance is the property of a material that opposes the flow of electric charge. When voltage pushes charge through a conductor, resistance is the reason that charge cannot move freely. It is measured in ohms and governed by Ohm's law. Voltage equals current times resistance. At the atomic level, free electrons drift through a lattice of positively charged metal ions. As they move, they collide with vibrating ions and lattice imperfections, transferring energy as heat and slowing their average drift. It is the cumulative effect of these collisions that a circuit measures as resistance. 4 physical factors determine resistance. Resistivity is an intrinsic material property. Copper is low, nichrome is high. A longer wire provides more collision opportunities, so resistance scales with length. A wider cross-sectional area offers more parallel paths, reducing resistance. And for most metals, higher temperature means harder vibrating ions and greater resistance. Test writers cluster resistance alongside voltage, current, and capacitance. Voltage is the pressure driving charge. Current is the rate of flow. Capacitance stores charge on plates and releases it later. It does not oppose ongoing current. Only resistance opposes flow and dissipates energy as heat. The most common exam confusion is between resistance and capacitance, since both are passive component properties. Anchor each to its physical action. Resistance dissipates energy as heat by opposing current, while capacitance stores and releases charge. Keeping that distinction clear will steer you to the right answer every time. Question 4. Which word in the following sentence functions as a modifier? The exhausted nurse finished the long shift without complaint last night on the unit. Your options are A. Nurse, B. Shift, C. Exhausted, D. Finished. What's your answer? Commit to one before I continue. The correct answer is C. Exhausted. C is correct because exhausted is a modifier because it is an adjective that describes the noun nurse, telling what kind of nurse and adding information to the subject. Adjectives modify nouns and pronouns to give more detail. Is wrong because nurse is the simple subject of the sentence, a noun naming the person who performs the action. Subjects are not modifiers. They are the things modified by adjectives and other descriptive words around them today. B is wrong because shift is a noun functioning as the direct object of the verb. Although adjectives modify it, the word shift itself does not modify any other word in this particular sentence anywhere at all here. D is wrong because finished is the main verb of the sentence expressing the action performed by the subject. Main verbs are predicates, not modifiers, in this analysis of the standard parts of a complete English sentence. Modifiers are words, phrases, or clauses that add information about another word. They never serve as a subject or main verb. Their sole job is to qualify or describe something else in the sentence. Adjectives attach to nouns and pronouns, answering what kind, which one, how many, or whose. Adverbs attach to verbs, adjectives, and other adverbs, answering how, when, where, or to what extent. Adjectives appear in two positions, directly before the noun, the exhausted nurse, or after a linking verb, she was exhausted. Both count as adjectival modification because the descriptive word is still attaching its meaning to a noun. A word's part of speech depends on its function in a specific sentence, not its dictionary form. Exhausted is the main verb in one sentence and an adjective modifier in another. Test writers exploit this by placing participles where they could serve either role. When you're unsure whether a word is an adjective or adverb, ask what question it answers. What kind or which one points to an adjective? How, when, where, or to what extent points to an adverb? Strip the modifiers. If the sentence still works, they were never the subject or verb. Question 5. Which group of words from the sentence forms an independent clause? Although the patient was anxious, the procedure went smoothly without any delay. Your options are A. The procedure went smoothly. B. Although the patient was anxious. C. The patient was anxious. D. Went smoothly without any delay. Pick one. Trust your gut. Here's your chance to test yourself. The correct answer is A. The procedure went smoothly. A is correct because the procedure went smoothly contains a subject and a verb and expresses a complete thought. So it stands alone as an independent clause without needing other words to complete its meaning at all. B is wrong because although the patient was anxious begins with the subordinating conjunction although, which makes the clause dependent. It cannot stand alone as a complete sentence and must attach to an independent clause here. C is wrong because although this group has a subject and verb, the larger sentence introduces it with although, making the entire clause dependent on the rest. The subordinator above governs the clause's role in the sentence. D is wrong because went smoothly without any delay contains only a verb and a prepositional phrase. It lacks a subject, so it is a phrase, not a clause of any kind, and cannot stand alone as a sentence. Every clause has a subject and a verb, but not every clause can stand on its own. The key difference between independent and dependent clauses comes down to completeness, and one small but powerful word called a subordinating conjunction. An independent clause passes two checks. It has a subject and a finite verb, and it makes complete sense on its own. A dependent clause also has a subject and verb, but an opening subordinating conjunction prevents it from standing alone. If a group of words lacks either a subject or a finite verb, it's a phrase, not a clause at all. Consider this example. Although the patient was anxious, it has a subject and a verb, but the word although subordinates it, stripping the clause of independence. Remove although, and the patient was anxious becomes a perfectly complete independent clause. Subordinating conjunctions like although, because, when, since, if, unless, while, after, and before are the most common signals of a dependent clause. Spotting one of these words at the start of a clause is the fastest way to identify dependency on a test. When in doubt, read the clause aloud in isolation. If it sounds finished and self-contained, it's independent. If it leaves you waiting for more, a subordinator is almost certainly the culprit, and the clause is dependent. Question 6. Which of the following is a characteristic of all longitudinal waves? Your options are A. Travel only through a vacuum. B. Made of perpendicular electric fields. C. Have no relationship with sound. D. Particles vibrate parallel to wave travel. Which would you go with? Lock it in before the reveal. The correct answer is D. Particles vibrate parallel to wave travel. D is correct because longitudinal waves have particles that vibrate parallel to the direction of wave travel through the medium. Sound waves traveling through air illustrate this clearly by compressing and expanding the air along the path. A is wrong because longitudinal waves require a medium for propagation in most cases, especially for mechanical sound waves traveling through air. They do not travel only through a vacuum, unlike electromagnetic waves which can travel through. B is wrong because perpendicular electric and magnetic fields are features of electromagnetic waves, which are transverse rather than longitudinal in nature. Longitudinal waves are not defined by oscillating electromagnetic field components, so this description does not. C is wrong because sound is a primary example of a longitudinal wave traveling through a medium such as air. Saying longitudinal waves have no relationship with sound directly contradicts the most common example used in physics. Waves transport energy through space without permanently moving matter. The key distinction between wave types comes down to one thing: how the medium's particles move relative to the direction the wave itself is traveling. In a transverse wave, particles move at right angles to the wave's direction. In a longitudinal wave, particles move back and forth along the same line the wave travels. Both of these mechanical wave types require a medium. Picture a long spring stretched between two students. Push one end forward and a region of compressed coils rolls toward the far end. That's a compression. Behind it, coils spread apart in a rarefaction. Each coil only moves a short distance along the spring's axis, but the compression rarefaction pattern travels the full length. Sound is the textbook longitudinal wave, compressions and rarefactions rippling through a fluid medium. Light and other electromagnetic waves are transverse, with fields oscillating perpendicular to travel, and they require no medium at all. The exam trap is swapping parallel for perpendicular. If particles move parallel to wave travel, it's longitudinal, think sound. If perpendicular, it's transverse, think light. Anchor each type to its canonical example and the categories stay clear. Question 7. Vitamin D is synthesized in the skin when ultraviolet B radiation strikes a cholesterol precursor. The body then converts the precursor into the active hormonal form through steps in the liver and kidneys. Dietary sources contribute, but in many adults, sunlight exposure remains the dominant source year-round. According to the passage, which two organs help convert the skin-made precursor into active vitamin D? Your options are A. Pancreas and stomach, B. Heart and lungs, C. Liver and kidneys, D. Spleen and thymus. Don't overthink it. Which one feels right? The correct answer is C. Liver and kidneys. C is correct because the passage explicitly states that the body converts the precursor into the active hormonal form through the steps in the liver and kidneys, which is exactly the pair the question asks about in the stem. A is wrong because the pancreas and stomach are not mentioned in the passage at all in connection with vitamin D activation, so picking them imports organs the writer did not name and fails the basic textual check. B is wrong because the heart and lungs do not appear in the passage as conversion sites, and respiratory or cardiac organs play no described role in the vitamin D pathway the writer outlines for the reader. D is wrong because the spleen and thymus are not mentioned in the passage as conversion sites for vitamin D. So this option introduces immune-related organs the writer did not include in the synthesis pathway described. Supporting detail questions test whether you can locate a specific fact the writer actually included in the passage. They are not asking what you know from outside study. They are asking what this particular text says. When you see signal phrases like according to the passage states, the writer mentions, or as described in the text, the test is telling you to stay strictly inside the four corners of that text. A strong reader approaches a passage in layers. First identify the topic, then track the sequence of events, then lock in the specific names and order the writer used. Supporting detail questions reward exactly that third layer. In the passage, vitamin D activation follows a strict two-organ sequence. The liver performs the first hydroxylation to produce the stored, circulating form, and then the kidneys perform the second to produce calcitriol, the active hormone. Any answer citing a different pair of organ falls outside what the text says. The most common mix-up is confusing supporting detail items with main idea items. Supporting detail questions hinge on specific name facts, organs, dates, proper nouns. Main idea questions hinge on the central argument, which is broader than any single fact in the passage. Question 8. Which of the following is found in eukaryotic cells but not in prokaryotic cells? Your options are A. Membrane-bound nucleus, B. Ribosomes, C. Cell membrane, D. Cytoplasm. Got a guess? Lock it in. The correct answer is A. Membrane-bound nucleus. A is correct because a membrane-bound nucleus is the defining feature of eukaryotic cells. Prokaryotes, such as bacteria, have their DNA loose in a region called the nucleoid and lack any nucleus surrounded by a membrane in their cells. B is wrong because ribosomes are present in both prokaryotic and eukaryotic cells, although they differ slightly in size. They are the cellular structures responsible for protein synthesis in essentially every type of cell across all living organisms. C is wrong because all cells, prokaryotic and eukaryotic, have a cell membrane separating their interior from the outside environment. Therefore, the cell membrane is not unique to eukaryotic cells and cannot serve as a distinguishing feature. D is wrong because cytoplasm fills the interior of every cell, prokaryotic or eukaryotic, providing the medium in which cellular reactions take place. Because both cell types have cytoplasm, it is not unique to eukaryotes in any way. The single sharpest line dividing all living cells is whether or not the genetic material is enclosed in a membrane-bound nucleus. Eukaryotic cells have one. Prokaryotic cells do not. Inside a eukaryotic cell, the nucleus is a discrete organelle bounded by a double membrane studded with nuclear pore complexes. Prokaryotes keep their DNA loosely coiled in a region called the nucleoid, no surrounding membrane at all. The eukaryotic nucleus has three defining features: a double membrane envelope, nuclear pore complexes that selectively shuttle RNA and proteins, and chromatin, DNA wrapped tightly around histone proteins. Test questions often place shared features, ribosomes, cell membrane, and cytoplasm alongside the membrane-bound nucleus as answer choices. Ribosomes and a plasma membrane appear in both cell types. Only eukaryotes have a true nucleus and membrane-bound organelles. When you see the words nucleoid versus true nucleus, anchor your thinking to one question: is there a surrounding double membrane? That membrane is the boundary between the two domains of cellular life. Question 9. Which sentence shows correct subject-verb agreement? Sentence 1. The team of nurses are meeting. Sentence 2. Each of the patients have signed in. Sentence 3. Neither the doctor nor the nurses have arrived. Sentence 4. The boxes of supplies is heavy. Your options are A. Sentence 1, B. Sentence 2, C. Sentence 3, D. Sentence 4. Which one is it? Pause the video if you need more time. The correct answer is C. Sentence 3. C is correct because sentence 3 follows the rule that with neither nor, the verb agrees with the closer subjects. Nurses is plural, so the plural have correctly matches. This is sometimes called the proximity rule of agreement here. A is wrong because sentence 1 pairs team, a singular collective noun acting as one unit, with the plural verb are. The correct verb for the unified team is in formal traditional grammar tested on standardized exams today. B is wrong because sentence 2 uses the indefinite pronoun each, which is always singular. The plural verb should be. The singular has to match each. The prepositional phrase of the patients does not change the subject. D is wrong because sentence 4 has the plural subject boxes, not supplies, paired with the singular verb is. The correct verb for boxes is the plural form are. The prepositional phrase does not change the true grammatical subject. Subject-verb agreement requires a verb to match its subject in number. While the basic rule is straightforward, English has several edge cases that make this one of the most tested grammar topics on standardized exams. 3 rules carry most of the test weight. First, prepositional phrases between subject and verb don't change the subject. Second, indefinite pronouns like each, every, either, and neither are always singular. Third, with or and nor, the verb agrees with the closer subject. This is called the proximity rule. Consider the sentence, each of the patients have signed the form. The proofreader must mentally strip the prepositional phrase of the patients and identify the bare subject, each, which is singular. That means the correct verb is has signed, not have signed. Test writers exploit these patterns repeatedly. A collective noun like team, jury, or committee acting as a unit takes a singular verb in American English. Watch for plural-sounding modifiers attached to singular subjects as they're bait designed to trigger a wrong verb choice. Whenever agreement feels uncertain, strip away every prepositional phrase and modifier until only the bare subject remains. The verb form that subject demands is always the correct one. Question 10. Which gland is often called the master gland because it controls many other endocrine glands? Your options are A. Thyroid gland, B. Adrenal gland, C. Thymus, D. Pituitary gland. Take a second. Which answer would you pick? The correct answer is D, pituitary gland. D is correct because the pituitary gland is called the master gland because it secretes hormones that regulate the thyroid, adrenal cortex, gonads, and other endocrine targets. The hypothalamus in turn controls the release of pituitary hormones. A is wrong because the thyroid gland produces hormones that regulate metabolism, growth, and development. It is itself regulated by thyroid-stimulating hormone from the pituitary, so it is not considered the master gland of the endocrine system. B is wrong because the adrenal gland produces cortisol, aldosterone, sex hormones, and catecholamines such as epinephrine. It is regulated by pituitary hormones like adrenocorticotropic hormone, so it follows rather than directs the master gland. C is wrong because the thymus produces hormones involved in T lymphocyte maturation and is important for immune development, especially in childhood. It does not control other endocrine glands or release a wide range of regulatory hormones. The pituitary gland earns its title of master gland not because of its size, it's barely the size of a pea, but because it directs the activity of nearly every other endocrine gland in the body. Structurally, the pituitary sits in a bony depression of the skull called the sella turcica, connected to the hypothalamus above by a thin stalk called the infundibulum. It has two functionally distinct lobes, the anterior lobe and the posterior lobe. The anterior lobe synthesizes 6 tropic hormones, TSH, SH, FSH, LH, growth hormone, and prolactin, each targeting a downstream gland. The posterior lobe stores and releases ADH and oxytocin, which are actually produced by the hypothalamus. Test riders offer the thyroid, adrenal, and thymus as decoys, but all are downstream targets of the pituitary. The hypothalamus outranks the pituitary, but it's classified as part of the brain, not an endocrine gland, in most exam contexts. The cleanest exam separator. The hypothalamus controls the pituitary with small regulatory peptides, while the pituitary translates those signals into blood-borne tropic hormones that drive distant glands. Master gland always means pituitary. Question 11. Which best describes how the endocrine system communicates with its target cells? Your options are A. Through electrical impulses along axons, B. Through antibody binding to antigens, C. Through hormones released into the blood, D. Through muscle contractions. Before I reveal it, which one do you think is right? The correct answer is C. Through hormones released into the blood. C is correct because the endocrine system communicates by releasing hormones from ductless glands directly into the bloodstream. Hormones travel to distant target cells with matching receptors and produce slow but widespread effects throughout the body. A is wrong because communication through electrical impulses along axons is characteristic of the nervous system, not the endocrine system. Neurons use rapid action potentials and synapses, while endocrine signaling relies on circulating chemicals. B is wrong because antibody binding to antigens is a feature of the immune system. Antibodies neutralize pathogens and tag them for destruction, but they are not the messengers used by the endocrine system to regulate body functions. D is wrong because muscle contractions produce movement and generate force. They are an output of the muscular system rather than a means of endocrine communication, although hormones can influence how muscles respond and contract. The body runs 2 great communication systems side by side. Understanding what makes endocrine signaling unique and how it differs from everything else is the key insight the exam is testing. Nervous communication is fast, point to point, and electrical. Action potentials travel along axons to specific synaptic targets. Endocrine communication is slower and broadcast, releasing hormones from ductless glands into the bloodstream so they can reach any tissue in the body, The endocrine mechanism follows a clean sequence. A ductless gland releases a hormone into the bloodstream. The hormone circulates everywhere, but only target cells carrying a matching receptor respond, triggering an intracellular cascade that can last hours. Test writers love pairing endocrine signaling with look-alike options. The nervous system uses axons and synapses. The immune system uses cytokines acting locally between cells. Paracrine and autocrine signals are chemical and receptor mediated, but they never enter the bloodstream, so none of these are endocrine. Anchor everything to that single defining feature. A hormone travels through the blood to a distant target cell with a matching receptor. If the blood-borne distribution step is missing, it is not endocrine signaling. Question 12. What is the role of the Golgi apparatus in the eukaryotic cell? Your options are A. To digest macromolecules into their components. B. To detoxify drugs and harmful products. C. To perform cellular respiration to make ATP. D. To package and process materials for transport. What's your answer? Commit to one before I continue. The correct answer is D. To package and process materials for transport. D is correct because the Golgi apparatus modifies, sorts, and packages proteins and lipids received from the endoplasmic reticulum. It then ships these molecules in vesicles to their final destinations inside or outside the cell as needed. A is wrong because digestion of macromolecules into their components is the function of lysosomes. They contain hydrolytic enzymes that break down worn organelles, food particles, and foreign material brought into the cell by various processes. B is wrong because detoxification of drugs and harmful products is performed mainly by the smooth endoplasmic reticulum, especially in liver cells. The Golgi apparatus does not specialize in detoxification within the cell and serves a different role. C is wrong because cellular respiration to make ATP takes place in the mitochondria, often called the powerhouse of the cell. The Golgi apparatus is involved in modifying and shipping molecules, not generating ATP energy for the cell. The Golgi apparatus is a membrane-bound organelle found in eukaryotic cells. It serves as the cell's central processing and shipping hub for proteins and lipids after they leave the endoplasmic reticulum. Structurally, the Golgi looks like a stack of flattened membrane sacs called cisternae. It has a clear polarity. The cis face receives incoming transport vesicles from the rough endoplasmic reticulum, while the trans face sends finished cargo out in secretory vesicles. Proteins arriving from the rough ER need extensive finishing. As they move through each cisterna from cis to trans, enzymes add or trim sugar chains, attach sulfate and phosphate groups, and clip signal sequences. By the transphase, each protein is tagged with addressing information telling the cell exactly where to ship it. The key exam distinction is keeping the Golgi separate from organelles whose role sounds similar. Lysosomes digest macromolecules. The Golgi only packages their enzymes. Smooth ER handles detoxification and lipid synthesis. Mitochondria produce ATP. The Golgi signature is modification, sorting, and packaging, never digestion, detoxification, or energy production. When you see words like glycosylation, secretory vesicles, cis face or trans face on a test, think Golgi. The rough ER synthesizes and initially folds proteins. The Golgi modifies, sorts, and ships them. Endoplasmic reticulum first. Golgi second, vesicle out the door. Question 13. Which type of transport requires the cell to use ATP to move molecules across the membrane? Your options are diffusion, B. Osmosis, C. Active transport, D. Facilitated diffusion. Pick one. Trust your gut. Here's your chance to test yourself. The correct answer is C, active transport. C is correct because active transport moves substances against their concentration gradient from low to high concentration. This requires energy from ATP, often coupled with carrier proteins such as a sodium-potassium pump found in cell membranes. A is wrong because diffusion is the movement of particles from high concentration to low concentration without any energy input from the cell. It relies only on the random motion of molecules and does not require ATP. B is wrong because osmosis is the diffusion of water across a selectively permeable membrane and does not require ATP. Water moves passively from a region of higher water concentration to one of lower water concentration through the membrane. D is wrong because facilitated diffusion uses membrane proteins to help substances cross the membrane down their concentration gradient. Because it moves with the gradient, no ATP is required for facilitated diffusion to occur within the cell. Active transport is the only membrane transport mode that moves substances against their concentration gradient, from low to high concentration. Because this is energetically uphill work, it requires a direct input of cellular energy in the form of ATP. The sodium-potassium pump is the classic example. It binds 3 sodium ions on the inside, uses 1 ATP to change shape and release them outside, then picks up 2 potassium ions from outside and deposits them inside, all against both gradients. Keeping these 4 modes straight is the core exam skill. Diffusion, osmosis, and facilitated diffusion all move substances down their gradients and require no ATP. Active transport is uniquely defined by movement up the gradient and a mandatory energy cost. On test day, certain phrases reliably flag active transport, movement against a gradient, ATP or energy required, or a name pump such as the sodium, potassium, or hydrogen pump. If a STEM says a substance moves from low to high concentration, active transport is the answer. The distinction between active transport and facilitated diffusion comes down to one question: is the substance moving with or against its gradient? Against the gradient with ATP consumed means active transport. Every time, no guesswork needed. Question 14. A balanced diet is not about avoiding any single food group. It is about proportion and variety. Carbohydrates, proteins, and fats must be obtained in the ratios the body's tissues require. Excluding any major category in pursuit of a fashionable diet usually creates deficits other foods cannot fully replace. Which choice best expresses the main idea? Your options are: A. Balance depends on proportion, not exclusion. B. Carbohydrates are the most important nutrient. C. Fashionable diets cause vitamin deficiencies. D. The Mediterranean diet is the healthiest. Which would you go with? Lock it in before the reveal. The correct answer is A. Balance depends on proportion, not exclusion. A is correct because the passage rejects exclusion and elevates proportion and variety as the organizing principle, which is precisely the central claim a faithful main idea answer must mirror, without distortion or unsupported additions to the writer's words. B is wrong because no nutrient is ranked above the others in the excerpt, and the writer explicitly avoids elevating any single food category over the rest of a varied dietary pattern across daily meals. C is wrong because deficiency from fad dieting is one consequence the passage mentions in passing, not the framing claim around which the entire excerpt is organized for the reader trying to grasp its central point. D is wrong because the Mediterranean diet is not even named in this excerpt, so calling it healthiest introduces information the passage does not actually supply at any point in its short argument about balance. The main idea is the central claim that organizes an entire passage. It's what the passage is really about. A strong main idea is broad enough to cover every paragraph, narrow enough to exclude what the passage never says, and accurate to the writer's actual emphasis. Think of it as a three-way balance, broad enough to cover the whole passage, narrow enough to exclude outside facts, and accurate to what the writer actually argues, not what you already know about the topic. Trap answers follow predictable patterns. Too narrow elevates one detail as the main point. Too broad goes beyond what the passage claims. Contradiction reverses the writer's direction. Outside knowledge brings in true facts the passage never mentions. The cleanest way to tell them apart is the coverage check. Ask whether the proposed idea covers every paragraph. If yes, it's likely the main idea. If no, it's a supporting detail, a specific fact, example, or piece of evidence arranged to demonstrate the broader claim. On exam day, read the full passage before touching the answer choices. Then summarize the main idea in your own words. Match that summary to the closest option. Skipping this step is exactly what the trap answers are designed to exploit. Question 15. Which formed element of the blood is primarily responsible for transporting oxygen throughout the body? Your options are A. Platelets, B. Neutrophils, C. Erythrocytes, D. Lymphocytes. Don't overthink it. Which one feels right? The correct answer is C. Erythrocytes. C is correct because erythrocytes, or red blood cells, are filled with hemoglobin that binds oxygen in the lungs and releases it in tissues. They are the main oxygen carriers in the blood and also help transport carbon dioxide. A is wrong because platelets are small cell fragments derived from megakaryocytes that participate in blood clotting. They form plugs at sites of vessel injury and release clotting factors, but do not bind or transport oxygen. B is wrong because neutrophils are white blood cells that phagocytize bacteria and other pathogens during the early stages of infection. They are an important part of the innate immune response and do not transport oxygen. D is wrong because lymphocytes are white blood cells involved in adaptive immunity. B cells produce antibodies and T cells destroy infected or abnormal cells. But lymphocytes do not transport oxygen through the circulatory system. Blood is a connective tissue and its formed elements are the cellular components suspended in plasma. Understanding what each formed element does and why is the foundation of blood physiology. There are three categories of formed elements: erythrocytes, which carry oxygen, leukocytes, which handle immune defense, and platelets, which are small fragments that initiate clotting at sites of vessel injury. Each erythrocyte contains roughly 270 million hemoglobin molecules. Each hemoglobin has 4 hemogroups, and each hem holds an iron that reversibly binds one oxygen molecule. In the lungs, high oxygen pressure loads hemoglobin nearly to saturation. In the tissues, low oxygen pressure triggers release. Oxygen dissolves poorly in water, so plasma alone could carry only a tiny fraction of what tissues need. Packing hemoglobin into dedicated erythrocytes multiplies blood's oxygen carrying capacity by roughly 70-fold, the difference between barely sustaining rest and supporting full metabolism. The cleanest way to keep these categories straight is to anchor each formed element to its primary function. Erythrocytes are biconcave enucleate oxygen carriers. Leukocytes are nucleated immune cells. Platelets are tiny fragments that clot. Function is the separator. Question 16. Diabetic ketoacidosis develops when absolute insulin deficiency forces the body to break down fat for fuel. Ketone bodies build up, blood becomes acidic, and the patient may show fruity breath, deep rapid breathing, dehydration, and altered consciousness. Untreated, the condition can be fatal within hours. According to the passage, which respiratory finding is associated with diabetic ketoacidosis? Your options are A. Deep rapid breathing, B. Slow shallow breathing, C. Wheezing on exhalation, D. Periods of apnea. Got a guess? Lock it in. The correct answer is A, deep rapid breathing. A is correct because the passage explicitly lists deep rapid breathing among the signs of diabetic ketoacidosis alongside fruity breath, dehydration, and altered consciousness, so this option matches the supporting detail directly named in the text. B is wrong because slow, shallow breathing is the opposite of what the passage describes, since the writer attributes deep, rapid breathing to the condition as the body tries to blow off acidic carbon dioxide. C is wrong because wheezing on exhalation is not mentioned anywhere in the passage and would suggest an obstructive airway problem rather than the metabolic acidosis the writer is actually describing for the reader. D is wrong because periods of apnea do not appear in the passage as a feature of ketoacidosis. So picking this option introduces a respiratory pattern the writer never associates with the metabolic emergency described. Diabetic ketoacidosis is a life-threatening emergency triggered by a severe lack of insulin. Without insulin, cells cannot use glucose, so the body shifts to burning fatty acids instead. The liver converts fatty acid breakdown products, acetyl-CoAs, into ketone bodies, chiefly acetoacetate and beta-hydroxybutyrate. These accumulate faster than tissues can clear them, pulling blood pH down into a frank metabolic acidosis. The acidosis impairs enzyme function body-wide and clouds consciousness. Hyperglycemia drives osmotic diuresis, causing severe dehydration and electrolyte loss. Potassium shifts out of cells, masking a dangerous total body depletion behind a normal or even elevated serum level. As blood pH falls, central chemoreceptors detect the change and drive deeper, faster breathing to blow off carbon dioxide and raise pH back toward normal. This compensatory pattern, Kussmaul respiration, produces deep, regular, visibly labored breaths. Patients may even describe a sensation of air hunger at rest. It is easy to confuse DKA with hyperosmolar hyperglycemic state. DKA features prominent ketones, acidosis, and Kussmaul breathing, typically in type 1 diabetes. HHS brings extreme hyperglycemia and dehydration, but little ketosis, typically in older type 2 patients. Both require fluid and insulin, but the clinical pictures are distinct. Question 17. Which of the following describes the relationship between magnetism and moving electric charges? Your options are A. Magnetism only without electricity. B. Moving charges create magnetic fields. C. Moving charges destroy magnetic fields. D. Magnetism prevents charge motion. Which one is it? Pause the video if you need more time. The correct answer is B. Moving charges create magnetic fields. B is correct because moving electric charges create magnetic fields around their path of motion through space. This relationship is the basis of electromagnets used in motors and devices, and it underlies the close connection between electricity. A is wrong because magnetism and electricity coexist and are intimately related through electromagnetic theory in physics today. Moving charges generate magnetism in the space around their path, and changing magnetic fields can in turn generate electric. C is wrong because moving charges create magnetic fields, rather than destroying them in any way at all. The interaction of moving charges with already existing magnetic fields can cause forces on the charges, but this interaction. D is wrong because magnetism does not prevent charges from moving in general at all in physics during electromagnetic interactions. Magnetism can exert forces on moving charges through the magnetic part of the Lorentz force, but electricity and magnetism aren't separate forces. They're two expressions of a single underlying interaction called electromagnetism. Understanding how moving charges create magnetic fields is the key insight that ties everything together. A stationary electric charge produces only an electric field. The moment that charge moves, as currents in a wire, it also generates a magnetic field. The direction of that field follows the right-hand rule, and winding wire into a coil multiplies the effect dramatically. When current flows through the coil, moving charges generate a magnetic field that magnetizes the iron core. Open the switch. Current stops. The magnetic field collapses, and any attracted objects fall away. Perfect on-off control over magnetism through electricity. Test riders exploit the misconception that electricity and magnetism are independent. The correct framing is always this: moving charges create magnetic fields, and changing magnetic fields induce electric fields. These are two sides of the same coin, not competing ideas. Even permanent magnets owe their magnetism to moving charges, spinning and orbiting electrons inside the material. Anchoring every magnetic effect to moving charge keeps the unified picture intact and makes any exam question on this topic straightforward to navigate. Question 18. In which organelle does most cellular respiration occur in eukaryotic cells? Your options are A. Nucleus, B. Chloroplast, C. Ribosome, D. Mitochondrion. Take a second. Which answer would you pick? The correct answer is D. Mitochondrion. D is correct because mitochondria are often called the powerhouse of the cell because they carry out most of cellular respiration. The Krebs cycle and the electron transport chain occur inside mitochondria, producing the bulk of ATP. A is wrong because the nucleus stores DNA and controls gene expression, but it is not the site of cellular respiration. Energy production for the cell occurs in a different organelle dedicated to the synthesis of ATP from glucose. B is wrong because chloroplasts perform photosynthesis in plant and algal cells, capturing light energy to make glucose. They are not the location of cellular respiration, which uses glucose to make ATP for the rest of the cell. C is wrong because ribosomes are responsible for protein synthesis, not cellular respiration. They translate messenger RNA into polypeptide chains and have no direct role in extracting energy from glucose to produce ATP for the cell. The mitochondrion is the organelle responsible for the bulk of cellular respiration in eukaryotic cells. To understand why, it helps to look at its internal structure and evolutionary origin. The mitochondrion has two membranes. The gel-filled interior, called the matrix, hosts the citric acid cycle. The inner membrane carries the electron transport chain complexes and ATP synthase, whose folds are called cristae. Cellular respiration has three major stages. Glycolysis happens in the cytoplasm, but the citric acid cycle and electron transport chain both occur inside the mitochondrion and together account for the vast majority of ATP produced. A common test trap is confusing the mitochondrion with neighboring organelles. The nucleus handles transcription. Chloroplasts capture light to build glucose, and ribosomes synthesize proteins. None of these extract energy from glucose. The cleanest way to keep mitochondria and chloroplasts apart is the direction of energy flow. Chloroplasts build glucose from sunlight. Mitochondria break glucose down into ATP. Plant cells have both, but animal cells rely on mitochondria alone. Question 19. Which of the following best describes radioactive decay? Your options are A occurs only when atoms are heated. B always produces visible light. C unstable nucleus emits energy or particles. D changes only the electron arrangement. Before I reveal it, which one do you think is right? The correct answer is C. Unstable nucleus emits energy or particles. C is correct because radioactive decay occurs when an unstable atomic nucleus releases energy or particles to reach a more stable nuclear configuration. This nuclear process changes the identity or mass number of the original atom, which A is wrong because radioactive decay is independent of temperature under normal conditions encountered in everyday life and laboratory settings. Heating a sample of radioactive material does not cause or significantly speed up the spontaneous nuclear changes. B is wrong because radioactive decay can release particles or various forms of radiation, but it does not always produce visible light. Many radioactive decays release invisible alpha or beta particles or invisible gamma rays rather than. D is wrong because radioactive decay involves changes in the nucleus of the atom, not just changes in the electron arrangement around the nucleus. Modifying the electron arrangement creates ions or excited atoms in chemistry, but those. Radioactive decay is the spontaneous transformation of an unstable nucleus into a more stable one, releasing energy or particles in the process. Unlike chemical reactions, which only rearrange electrons, decay actually changes the nucleus itself, often turning one element into another entirely. Stability depends on the balance between two forces inside the nucleus. The strong nuclear force holds protons and neutrons together at very short range, while the electromagnetic force pushes protons apart. When the proton-to-neutron ratio drifts outside a narrow band, the nucleus becomes unstable. There are four main decay modes. Alpha decay ejects a helium-4 nucleus, lowering the mass number by 4. Beta minus converts a neutron into a proton. Beta plus does the reverse. Gamma decay releases only a high-energy photon, leaving the nuclear composition unchanged. Each mode has a characteristic half-life. The key distinction is what actually changes. In radioactive decay, the proton count inside the nucleus changes, transforming one element into another. In a chemical reaction, only the electron cloud is rearranged. The nuclei and their elemental identities remain completely intact. Remember, heating, cooling, dissolving, or pressurizing a radioactive sample does not alter its decay rate. The rate is fixed by the nuclear physics of the isotope alone. Whenever a test stem mentions half-life, alpha or beta particles, or atomic number changes, that is nuclear physics, not chemistry. Question 20. Which hormone stimulates the kidneys to reabsorb water and reduce the volume of urine produced? Your options are aldosterone, B. Antidiuretic hormone, T. Atrial natriuretic peptide, D. Oxytocin. What's your answer? Commit to one before I continue. The correct answer is B. Antidiuretic hormone. B is correct because antidiuretic hormone, released from the posterior pituitary, increases water reabsorption in the collecting ducts of the kidney. This concentrates urine, reduces urine volume, and conserves body water during dehydration or high blood osmolarity. A is wrong because aldosterone is produced by the adrenal cortex and primarily promotes sodium reabsorption and potassium excretion in the kidney's distal tubules. Water tends to follow sodium, but aldosterone is not the direct water-conserving hormone. C is wrong because atrial natriuretic peptide is released by stretched cardiac atria when blood volume is high. It promotes sodium and water loss in the urine, lowering blood volume and pressure, opposing antidiuretic hormone in its action. D is wrong because oxytocin causes uterine contractions during labor and milk ejection during breastfeeding. It is also released from the posterior pituitary, but does not regulate water reabsorption or urine volume produced by the kidneys. Antidiuretic hormone, or ADH, is the body's primary tool for fine-tuning water balance. It's produced in the hypothalamus, stored in the posterior pituitary, and released whenever blood osmolarity rises or blood volume falls. At the cellular level, ADH binds receptors on the basolateral side of collecting duct cells. This triggers aquaporin 2 water channels to fuse with the apical membrane, allowing water to flow from the duct lumen back into the bloodstream down its osmotic gradient. 4 hormones are commonly tested together. ADH moves water alone via aquaporin channels. Aldosterone reabsorbs sodium with water following passively. Atrial natriuretic peptide promotes sodium and water excretion. Oxytocin handles uterine contractions and milk ejection. It does not regulate water reabsorption. When you sweat or become dehydrated, rising plasma osmolarity triggers hypothalamic osmoreceptors. The posterior pituitary releases ADH, and the kidneys respond by producing small volumes of highly concentrated urine to defend blood volume. The key exam insight is this: ADH moves water alone by inserting aquaporin channels, while aldosterone moves sodium first with water following passively. Anchor each hormone to its primary substance, and they stay cleanly separated. Question 21. Which of the following is the final electron acceptor in the electron transport chain during aerobic respiration? Your options are A. Carbon dioxide, B. Glucose, C. Oxygen, D. Water. Pick one. Trust your gut. Here's your chance to test yourself. The correct answer is C. Oxygen. C is correct because oxygen accepts electrons at the end of the electron transport chain, combining with hydrogen ions to form water. Without oxygen, the chain stops, and aerobic ATP production cannot continue inside the mitochondria of human cells. I is wrong because carbon dioxide is a waste product of the Krebs cycle and is exhaled from the body. It is not used to accept electrons at the end of the electron transport chain during aerobic. B is wrong because glucose is the starting fuel for cellular respiration, not the final electron acceptor at any stage. Electrons from glucose pass along the chain until they reach a different molecule at the end. D is wrong because water is produced when oxygen accepts electrons and combines with hydrogen ions, but it is the product, not the acceptor. The molecule that actually receives the electrons at the chain end is oxygen. The electron transport chain is the powerhouse of aerobic respiration, and understanding exactly what each molecule does in the chain is the key to mastering this topic. The chain is a series of 4 protein complexes embedded in the inner mitochondrial membrane. Electrons from reduced carriers like NADH and FADH2 travel through complexes or through AV, driving proton pumping along the way. At complex of 4, oxygen accepts the final electrons and combines with hydrogen ions to form water. 3 molecules are frequently confused on exams. Glucose is the upstream starting fuel, oxidized step by step. Carbon dioxide is a waste product released during the citric acid cycle, not the chain. Oxygen alone is the terminal electron acceptor at complex 4. Oxygen's high electronegativity gives it a powerful pull on electrons, releasing a large amount of energy that drives proton pumping and ATP synthesis. Without oxygen, the chain stalls completely. The proton gradient collapses, and cells fall back on anaerobic glycolysis, producing lactic acid as a byproduct. The bottom line, oxygen is the molecule that ends the electron transport chain by accepting electrons and forming water. That irreversible final step keeps the entire chain running and is what makes aerobic respiration so energetically powerful. Question 22. Which of the following best describes the behavior of light when it passes from air into water? Your options are A. Speeds up and travels straight, B. Converts entirely into heat, C. Vanishes at the surface, D. Slows down and bends toward normal. Which would you go with? Lock it in before the reveal. The correct answer is D. Slows down and bends toward normal. D is correct because when light passes from air into water during refraction, it slows down because water is optically denser than air. This change in speed causes the light to bend toward the normal at the... A is wrong because light slows down rather than speeding up when it enters a denser medium like water from air during refraction. Light also bends rather than continuing in a perfectly straight line through the boundary. B is wrong because light does not convert entirely into heat at the boundary between air and water during normal optical interactions. Some absorption occurs at the interface, but most of the light reflects, refracts, or transmits. C is wrong because light does not vanish at the air-water surface during refraction at the boundary between media. Part of the incident light reflects back into the air at the boundary, while the remainder enters. Refraction is what happens when light crosses from one transparent medium into another and changes direction. It occurs because light travels at different speeds in different materials, and that speed change is what causes the bending. Light moves fastest through a vacuum, slightly slower through air, noticeably slower through water, and slower still through glass. The denser the medium optically, the higher its index of refraction, and the more light slows down inside it. When a light ray hits the air-water boundary at an angle, it slows down and bends toward the normal, the imaginary line perpendicular to the surface. The angle of refraction is smaller than the angle of incidence. This relationship between the two angles is precisely what Snell's law captures. It helps to keep three related phenomena distinct. Refraction is the through path. Light bends as it passes into the new medium. Reflection is the bounce path. Light returns into the original medium. Dispersion is a special case of refraction where different wavelengths bend by different amounts, splitting white light into colors. The cleanest exam day anchor is this. Entering a denser medium, light slows down and bends toward the normal. Entering a less dense medium, it speeds up and bends away. Everything else in refraction follows from that one consistent pattern. Question 23. Which chamber of the heart pumps oxygenated blood out to the systemic circulation? Your options are A. Left ventricle, B. Right ventricle, C. Left atrium, D. Right atrium. Don't overthink it. Which one feels right? The correct answer is A. Left ventricle. A is correct because the left ventricle pumps oxygenated blood through the aortic valve into the aorta and onward to the systemic circulation. Its thick muscular wall generates the high pressure needed to perfuse the entire body. B is wrong because the right ventricle pumps deoxygenated blood through the pulmonary valve and pulmonary artery into the lungs. Its wall is thinner because pulmonary resistance is much lower than systemic vascular resistance during normal circulation. C is wrong because the left atrium receives oxygenated blood from the pulmonary veins and pumps it into the left ventricle through the mitral valve. It primes the left ventricle but does not pump blood to systemic arteries. D is wrong because the right atrium receives deoxygenated blood from the body through the superior and inferior venae cavae. It pumps blood into the right ventricle, not directly into systemic arteries that carry oxygen-rich blood. The heart is a four-chambered pump organized into two parallel circuits, each side handling a distinct type of blood and a distinct destination. Understanding why the chambers look different from each other is the key to mastering cardiac anatomy questions. The right atrium and right ventricle drive pulmonary circulation, sending deoxygenated blood to the lungs. The left atrium and left ventricle drive systemic circulation, pushing oxygenated blood to every tissue in the body. Atria are the upper receiving chambers. Ventricles are the lower ejecting chambers. Inside the heart, the left ventricle has a dramatically thicker muscular wall than the right ventricle. That asymmetry exists because systemic circulation is long and high resistance. The left ventricle must generate roughly 120 mm of pressure to reach the brain and toes, while the right ventricle needs only about 25 millitons to perfuse the nearby lungs. Oxygenated blood returns from the lungs via the 4 pulmonary veins into the left atrium. The left atrium contracts, pushing blood through the mitral valve into the left ventricle. When the ventricle contracts, the mitral valve closes, the aortic valve opens, and blood is ejected into the aorta to perfuse the entire body. When a test stem mentions the aorta, thick muscular wall, systemic circulation, or oxygenated blood, it is pointing to the left ventricle. When it mentions the pulmonary artery or blood traveling to the lungs, it points to the right. Keep the 2x2 grid in mind and most cardiac anatomy errors disappear. Question 24. Which of the following describes the relationship between wave frequency and wavelength when wave speed is constant? Your options are A. Both increase together. B. Frequency up, wavelength down. C. Both decrease together. D. They are unrelated. Got a guess? Lock it in. The correct answer is B. Frequency up, wavelength down. B is correct because when wave speed is constant during the propagation of a wave, frequency and wavelength are inversely related to each other. As frequency increases for the wavelength must decrease accordingly, and as. A is wrong because frequency and wavelength do not increase together at constant wave speed in physics during wave propagation. Their product is the wave speed itself, so when speed stays constant for the wave, one quantity. C is wrong because frequency and wavelength cannot decrease together while wave speed remains constant during propagation. Their product equals the speed of the wave, so a decrease in both quantities at the same time would mean. D is wrong because frequency and wavelength are tightly related through the wave speed of any wave in any medium during propagation. They are not independent quantities, especially when the speed of the wave through the medium. Every wave is described by 3 connected quantities: frequency, wavelength, and speed. Understanding how these 3 relate to each other is the core idea here. Frequency counts how many cycles pass a fixed point each second. Wavelength is the spatial gap between matching points on consecutive cycles. Speed tells us how fast the wave moves through its medium. These 3 are locked together by one equation: speed equals frequency times wavelength. Picture a wave rolling past a stationary observer. The distance between crests is the wavelength. The number of crests that pass per second is the frequency. The wave's overall speed ties those 2 together. When wave speed is held constant by the medium, frequency and wavelength must compensate for each other. Raise the frequency and the wavelength shrinks. Lower the frequency and the wavelength grows. They move in opposite directions to keep their product, the speed, unchanged. On any test stem that fixes wave speed, the only valid outcome is one quantity rising while the other falls. Keep amplitude separate. It measures energy, not the timing and spacing relationship that frequency and wavelength share. Question 25. The skin has 3 principal layers. The epidermis is the thin outermost layer that provides waterproofing and a barrier against pathogens. Below it lies the dermis, which holds blood vessels, nerves, and sweat glands. The deepest layer, the hypodermis, stores fat and anchors the skin to underlying tissue. According to the passage, which layer contains nerves? Your options are A. The dermis, B. The epidermis, C. The hypodermis, D. The keratin layer. Which one is it? Pause the video if you need more time. The correct answer is A. The dermis. A is correct because the passage explicitly states that the dermis holds blood vessels, nerves, and sweat glands, which is exactly what the question asks about. So this option matches the supporting detail provided directly in the text. B is wrong because the passage describes the epidermis as the outermost layer responsible for waterproofing and barrier function, but it makes no mention of nerves residing in that specific outer layer of skin. C is wrong because the hypodermis is described in the passage as the deepest layer that stores fat and anchors the skin, with no nerve content attributed to it in the text the reader has been given. D is wrong because the passage never names a keratin layer at all, so this option introduces terminology the writer did not use and cannot serve as a faithful answer to a supporting detailed question about skin anatomy. The skin isn't just a simple covering, it's a precisely organized, layered organ where each level handles a distinct set of jobs. Understanding those roles makes it easy to map any structure a passage mentions to the correct layer. The epidermis acts as a waterproof barrier, blocking pathogens and preventing water loss. The dermis below it houses blood vessels, nerves, sweat glands, and hair follicles. Everything needed for sensation and thermoregulation. The deepest layer, the hypodermis, stores fat, cushions impacts, and anchors the skin to muscle and bone. In a cross-section, the dermis is the most structurally rich layer. Its nerve endings, including free endings for pain and temperature, plus specialized Meissner and Patinian corpuscles for touch and pressure, all depend on the blood supply that only the dermis provides. When reading a passage, certain signal words tell you which layer is being described. Keratin and waterproofing point to the epidermis. Nerves, blood vessels, and glands point to the dermis. Fat, insulation, and anchoring point to the hypodermis. Matching the passage's language to the correct layer is the key reading skill. Keep these three roles tagged in memory. Epidermis is the barrier, dermis is the functional support, hypodermis is storage and anchor. Any passage question about skin structure becomes straightforward once you can place each feature in its layer. Question 26. Which of the following word groups is a sentence fragment rather than a complete sentence with subject, verb, and full meaning? Your options are: A. The nurse documented the vital signs. B. Patients with chronic conditions need monitoring. C. She charted carefully every hour. D. Running through the hospital corridor quickly. Take a second. Which answer would you pick? The correct answer is D. Running through the hospital corridor quickly. D is correct because running through the hospital corridor quickly lacks both a subject and a finite verb. It is a participial phrase, which is a fragment, not a sentence, since participles cannot serve as main verbs alone here. A is wrong because the nurse documented the vital signs has a subject, a verb, and a complete thought, meeting every requirement of a grammatically complete sentence. It can stand alone without any further words at all today. B is wrong because patients with chronic conditions need monitoring includes the subject patients and the verb need, expressing a complete thought without missing elements. It is therefore a complete sentence and not a fragment in any way. C is wrong because she charted carefully every hour has a clear subject, a finite verb, and modifiers. It expresses a complete idea and stands as a full sentence with no missing essential grammatical elements at all here. Every complete sentence must pass 3 tests. Understanding why fragments fail these tests and how to spot them is the core skill being assessed here. Ask 3 questions in order. Is there a subject naming who or what the sentence is about? Is there a finite verb, not a participle or infinitive, expressing what the subject does? And does the unit make sense by itself without leaning on another sentence? Fragments come in disguise. A participial phrase like running through the corridor has a verb-like word but no finite verb and no subject. A clause beginning with although or because is dependent and cannot stand alone. And a phrase loaded with modifiers can look like a sentence while hiding the fact that no real subject or finite verb is present. Compare running through the corridor with she ran through the corridor. The fragment has a participle but no subject and no finite verb. The complete sentence supplies all three elements. Length is not the test, structure is. Anchor every judgment to the three-question check, not to how long the candidate sentence looks. If any one of the three elements is missing, it is a fragment, and that is the error the exam is asking you to find. Question 27. Which group of words from the sentence is a prepositional phrase? The medication cart in the hallway needs restocking before the next shift starts. Your options are A. The medication cart. B. Needs restocking. C. In the hallway. D. The next shift. Before I reveal it, which one do you think is right? The correct answer is C. In the hallway. C is correct because in the hallway is a prepositional phrase because it begins with the preposition in and ends with the noun hallway, the object of that preposition. Prepositional phrases always follow this basic grammatical structure consistently. A is wrong because the medication cart is a noun phrase that functions as the subject. It does not begin with a preposition, so it is not a prepositional phrase under any standard definition of the term in grammar. B is wrong because needs restocking is a verb phrase containing the main verb and a gerund. Verb phrases function as predicates, not as prepositional phrases, since they do not begin with prepositional words at all in sentences. D is wrong because the next shift is a noun phrase that serves as the object of the preposition before. The preposition itself sits outside this group of words, so it is not a prepositional phrase in this sentence. A prepositional phrase is a structural unit that begins with a preposition and ends with a noun or pronoun, called the object of the preposition. Understanding how these phrases are built and where they end is one of the most useful grammar skills you can develop. The mechanics are straightforward. A preposition opens the phrase. Optional modifiers may follow, and the phrase closes exactly at the object noun. Nothing after that object belongs to the phrase. English uses prepositions in, on, at, before, after, to, from, with, and many more to express relationships of place, time, direction, and manner. Each preposition signals a specific kind of relationship, and the noun that follows specifies the other end of it. Not every word group containing a noun is a prepositional phrase. The medication cart is a noun phrase serving as the subject, and the next shift is a noun phrase that can follow a preposition. But neither one begins with a preposition, so neither counts as a prepositional phrase on its own. The quickest check on exam day, look at the very first word of the candidate group. If it is a preposition, you almost certainly have a prepositional phrase. If it is an article, verb, or noun, you are looking at something else entirely. Question 28. The first task of a triage nurse with a chest pain patient is not diagnosis, but speed of evaluation. Diagnostic work belongs to the physician. The triage system is built around a principle. Under-treating a serious symptom costs far more than over-treating a benign one. What is the main idea of the passage? Your options are A. Chest pain always signals a heart attack. B. Triage nurses should diagnose conditions themselves. C. Cardiovascular patients should avoid emergency departments. D. Triage prioritizes erring toward urgency. What's your answer? Commit to one before I continue. The correct answer is D. Triage prioritizes erring toward urgency. D is correct because the closing principle frames triage as a deliberate bias toward over-treatment of benign symptoms over under-treatment of serious ones, and that asymmetric logic is the integrating claim of the entire passage. A is wrong because the passage never claims chest pain always indicates infarction. It only describes how triage handles the possibility which is a separate and more measured claim about the work that triage actually performs. B is wrong because the passage explicitly draws a line between triage decisions and physician diagnosis, and a main idea must preserve rather than violate that distinction between assessment speed and the diagnostic work that follows it. C is wrong because no advice is offered about whether patients should visit an emergency department. So this option imports a recommendation. The passage does not make and shifts focus away from the triage practice it describes. When a passage builds toward a closing principle, that principle is usually the main idea. It's what every other sentence was working toward. Finding it requires reading actively and thinking about how the whole passage fits together. Wrong answer choices follow 4 reliable patterns. A choice is too narrow if it names a real but secondary detail. It's too broad if it overstates the writer's claim. It contradicts if it reverses the logic, and it imports if it introduces outside knowledge. The cleanest test is the coverage check. Ask, if this were the thesis, would every paragraph in the passage reasonably support it? If yes, it's likely the main idea. If only one paragraph supports it, you found a supporting detail, not the integrating claim. Think of the thesis as the hub that every other sentence connects to. Case examples, evidence, and the closing principle all feed into one integrating claim. A reader who identifies that hub can summarize the passage, predict its conclusions, and recognize which answer choices stray off target. On exam day, your one-sentence summary is your anchor. Hold each answer choice against it. If the choice is narrower, broader, contradictory, or imports outside facts, eliminate it. The correct choice covers the passage and only the passage. Question 29. Which sentence is written in the active voice? Sentence 1. The doctor examined the patient. Sentence 2. A specimen was collected by the technician. Sentence 3. The medication was given by the nurse. Sentence 4. The chart was updated by the resident. Your options are A. Sentence 1, B. Sentence 2, C. Sentence 3, D. Sentence 4. Pick one. Trust your gut. Here's your chance to test yourself. The correct answer is A. Sentence 1. A is correct because sentence 1 is in the active voice because the subject doctor performs the action of examining. The verb examine directly takes the object patient. Active voice features the doer first, followed by the action. B is wrong because sentence 2 uses was collected, indicating that the subject specimen receives the action. The technician acts upon the specimen, making this passive voice. Passive constructions place the receiver as the grammatical subject of the verb. C is wrong because sentence 3 uses was given, a passive construction. The subject medication receives the action rather than performing it, so the voice is passive, not active. Passive sentences typically include be plus a participle. D is wrong because sentence 4 uses was updated, with the subject chart receiving the action. Because the doer follows by, the construction is passive rather than active. Passive voice de-emphasizes the actor of the verb in any sentence. Active and passive voice are 2 ways to arrange the same information in a sentence. The difference comes down to whether the grammatical subject is performing the action or receiving it. In active voice, the subject performs the action. The doctor examined the patient. In passive voice, the subject receives the action, and the verb always contains a form of to be plus a past participle. The patient was examined by the doctor. Spotting passive voice means checking 3 things: whether the subject is receiving the action, whether the verb includes a form of to be plus a past participle, and whether a by phrase names the actor. The by phrase can be omitted. The patient was examined is still passive, even without by the doctor. Visually, active sentences flow from actor to action to receiver. Passive sentences flip that order, foregrounding the receiver, burying the actor in a by phrase, or leaving the actor out entirely. The most common exam day confusion is mixing up passive voice with past tense, since both can use was or were. The separator is simple. If a be verb is followed by a past participle and the subject is receiving the action, it is passive, regardless of tense. Question 30. Which type of feedback mechanism most commonly regulates hormone secretion to maintain homeostasis? Your options are A. Positive feedback, B. Open loop control, C. Negative feedback, D. Feed-forward regulation. Which would you go with? Lock it in before the reveal. The correct answer is C. Negative feedback. C is correct because negative feedback is the most common form of endocrine control. Rising hormone levels or downstream effects inhibit further secretion, which keeps the regulated variable within a narrow range and supports stable homeostasis. A is wrong because positive feedback amplifies a process and is used in events like childbirth, blood clotting, and the luteinizing hormone surge. It is not the typical mechanism for keeping hormone levels and other variables stable. B is wrong because open loop control occurs when output does not feed back to influence the controller. Endocrine regulation depends on sensing hormone effects in the blood, so it is not an open loop system in normal physiology. D is wrong because feed-forward regulation anticipates a change before it actually occurs, such as releasing insulin in response to the smell of food. It exists in physiology but is not the predominant control system for hormone secretion. Negative feedback is the dominant regulatory principle in human physiology. It keeps critical variables, temperature, blood glucose, blood pressure, pH, within the narrow ranges that cells need to survive. Every negative feedback loop shares the same three-part structure: a sensor that detects deviation from a set point, a controller that processes the signal, and an effector that corrects the variable in the opposite direction of the deviation. In the thyroid axis, the hypothalamus releases TRH, the pituitary releases TSH, and the thyroid releases thyroxine. As thyroxine rises, it feeds back to suppress both the pituitary and hypothalamus, quieting the upstream signals until levels drop back into range. It's important to distinguish negative feedback from three related concepts. Positive feedback amplifies a signal to completion. Open loop control has no feedback at all. And feed-forward regulation anticipates a change before it occurs. Only negative feedback is the dominant homeostatic mechanism. The cleanest test day rule: if rising output suppresses further activity, the feedback is negative. If rising output drives further activity, the feedback is positive. Anchor every regulatory scenario to the direction of the response. Question 31. Which of the following best describes the difference between reflection and refraction of light? Your options are A. Reflection bounces, refraction bends. B. Reflection only in water, refraction only air. C. Reflection changes color, refraction changes heat. D. They are the same process. Don't overthink it. Which one feels right? The correct answer is A. Reflection bounces, refraction bends. A is correct because reflection occurs when light bounces off a surface and returns into the original medium it came from. Refraction occurs when light bends as it passes from one medium into another due to A. B is wrong because both reflection and refraction can occur in many different media in optics during normal interactions. They are not restricted to water or air alone, but happen at any boundary or surface where appropriate. C is wrong because reflection does not necessarily change the color of the light involved in the process during the optical event. Refraction is not defined by heat transfer at all, so both processes are about the. D is wrong because reflection and refraction are distinct optical phenomena that follow different physical laws in optics. Reflection is the bouncing of light off a surface back into the original medium, while refraction is the bending. When light reaches a boundary between two transparent media, two distinct things can happen simultaneously. Understanding each process clearly is the key to answering optics questions correctly. An incident ray strikes the boundary and its energy splits. Some reflects back into the original medium, and some transmits into the new medium, both happening at the same boundary at the same moment. Reflection obeys a simple rule. The angle of incidence equals the angle of reflection, both measured from the normal. Refraction follows Snell's law, where the bending occurs because light changes speed as it crosses into the denser medium. The cleanest way to separate them: reflection returns light to its original medium with no change of medium, while refraction transmits light into a new medium with a change in direction. They are different responses to the same boundary event, not alternatives that exclude each other. Whenever a test stem mentions bouncing back or mirror angles, think reflection. Whenever it mentions bending, lenses, or crossing into a new medium, think refraction. Both laws are precise, predictable, and almost always acting together. Question 32. What is the simple predicate of the following sentence? The respiratory therapist quickly suctioned the airway during the emergency this morning. Your options are A. Therapist, B. Suctioned, C. Airway, D. Emergency. Got a guess? Lock it in. The correct answer is B. Suctioned. B is correct because suctioned is the simple predicate because it is the main verb expressing what the subject did. The simple predicate is always a verb or verb phrase, never a noun or modifier in any sentence ever. A is wrong because therapist is the simple subject because it names who performs the action. The simple predicate is the verb of the sentence, not the noun that does the acting on the airway during the emergency. C is wrong because airway is the direct object that receives the action of the verb. Direct objects are nouns, not verbs. So, they cannot be the simple predicate in any standard grammatical analysis of any sentence ever. D is wrong because emergency is a noun functioning as the object of the preposition during. Nouns inside prepositional phrases are never the simple predicate of the sentence, since the predicate must always be a verb form. The simple predicate is the grammatical core of every sentence, the main verb or verb phrase that expresses what the subject does or is. Understanding it unlocks the ability to pass every other element of a sentence. Think of it this way: the simple predicate names only the verb anchor, while the complete predicate includes the verb plus its objects and modifiers. In the sentence, the respiratory therapist suctioned the airway, suctioned is the simple predicate, and the airway is a separate direct object. When diagramming a sentence, the student first circles the simple subject, therapist, then asks, what did the therapist do? The answer, suctioned, is the simple predicate. Everything else, the airway quickly during the emergency, branches off as objects or modifiers. If a sentence has helping verbs, the entire verb phrase is the simple predicate. Had been working, will have finished, is being prepared. If two verbs are joined by and, the predicate is compound. The key rule: the simple predicate must always be a finite verb, never a noun, adjective, participle, or gerund. Test writers try to distract you with prominent nouns or verb-like participles. Stay anchored. Ask what the subject does or is. Find the tensed verb that answers that question, and you have the simple predicate every time. Question 33. Type 2 diabetes is preventable in most adults. Roughly 90% of new cases tie to modifiable risks such as inactivity, weight, and diet. The Diabetes Prevention Program found that weight loss and regular activity cut incidence by 58%, more than any tested medication produced. What is the main idea of the passage? Your options are: A. Diabetes is mainly a genetic disease. B. Sedentary behavior is the leading cause. C. Lifestyle change beats medication for prevention. D. The diabetes prevention program ran years. Which one is it? Pause the video if you need more time. The correct answer is C. Lifestyle change beats medication for prevention. C is correct because the passage builds toward the comparison that no medication matched lifestyle's effects on incidence. And that comparison is the integrating claim the writer wants the reader to take away from the brief. A is wrong because the passage frames diabetes as preventable and tied to modifiable risks. So calling the disease mainly genetic directly contradicts the central claim about how new adult cases actually develop in the population. B is wrong because sedentary behavior is one risk factor mentioned in the broader 90% modifiable category, but the passage does not single it out as the leading cause, and that overstatement narrows the integrating claim. D is wrong because the trial's duration is not given in the passage and would be incidental detail anyway, since the main idea must capture the substantive finding rather than logistical features of the underlying study itself. When an argumentative passage builds toward a comparison, the main idea is the comparison itself. Understanding this principle is key to answering main idea questions correctly on standardized exams. Every argumentative passage has a structure. The body sets up context. Specific figures like percentages serve as supporting evidence, and the final comparative claim is where the passage actually lands. The main idea lives at the conclusion level, not the evidence level. Think of it this way: a specific reduction figure is concrete and memorable, but it is one piece of evidence. The main idea is the integrating claim the evidence points toward. In this case, that lifestyle change outperforms medication for prevention. Wrong answers on main idea questions follow four predictable patterns: overstating the scope, understating by narrowing to one detail, contradicting the passage's framing, or importing claims the passage never made. Recognizing these traps helps you eliminate quickly and land on the comparative conclusion. When you evaluate a proposed main idea, ask whether it sits at the level of the writer's conclusion or at the level of one supporting piece of evidence. If it captures the comparison the passage builds toward, it is almost certainly correct. Question 34. Which of the following materials is generally a good conductor of electricity? Your options are A. Copper, B. Rubber, C. Glass, D. Drywood. Take a second. Which answer would you pick? The correct answer is A. Copper. A is correct because copper has many free electrons that move easily through its metal lattice, which makes it an excellent conductor of electricity. It is widely used in wiring throughout homes, electronic devices, and industrial machinery. B is wrong because rubber holds its electrons tightly in chemical bonds, which makes it a very poor conductor of electricity in any circuit. Rubber is widely used as an insulator around electrical wires to prevent electric. C is wrong because glass is an electrical insulator under ordinary conditions because its electrons are tightly bound within the chemical bonds of the silicate network. Glass does not allow electric current to flow through it easily. D is wrong because dry wood is a poor electrical conductor and behaves essentially like an insulator under ordinary conditions in any circuit. Although moist wood may conduct somewhat due to dissolved ions in the water, dry. Every material can be classified by how easily it allows electric current to flow. At one end of the spectrum are conductors, at the other are insulators. And understanding why they behave so differently comes down to how tightly electrons are held inside the material. In metals, Outermost valence electrons are donated into a shared electron sea that flows freely through a lattice of positive ion cores. When an electric field is applied, the sea drifts in response, producing a current. Copper, silver, aluminum, and iron all share this metallic bonding pattern. In insulators like rubber, dry wood, and glass, electrons are locked into chemical bonds and cannot drift through the material. There is no electron sea. Without electron drift, no current flows, no matter how strong the applied field, unless extreme voltage causes breakdown. On exam questions, test writers typically cluster one metal alongside insulators like rubber, glass, or plastic. The pattern is always the same. 3 of the 4 options are insulators and the metal is the conductor. Recognizing this pattern lets you answer quickly even with an unfamiliar material. The core idea is simple. Conductors have free electrons that drift under a field, while insulators have electrons tightly bound to atoms or bonds. Keep that distinction clear and you can classify any material confidently. Question 35. Where can ribosomes be found inside a eukaryotic cell? Your options are A. Only in the cytoplasm, B. On rough ER and in cytoplasm, C. Only on rough endoplasmic reticulum, D. Inside the lysosomes. Before I reveal it, which one do you think is right? The correct answer is B. On rough ER and in cytoplasm. B is correct because in a eukaryotic cell, ribosomes occur both attached to the rough endoplasmic reticulum and free within the cytoplasm. Free ribosomes typically make proteins used inside the cell, while bound ones make exported proteins for outside. A is wrong because ribosomes are found in the cytoplasm, but they are not limited to that location. Many ribosomes are also attached to the rough endoplasmic reticulum, where they synthesize proteins for export or for use in membranes. C is wrong because although ribosomes are found on the rough endoplasmic reticulum, they are not limited to that location. Many ribosomes float freely in the cytoplasm, especially when making proteins that will be used inside the cell. D is wrong because lysosomes contain digestive enzymes, but they do not house ribosomes. Lysosomal enzymes themselves are made on rough endoplasmic reticulum ribosomes and then shipped through the Golgi apparatus to lysosomes for storage. Ribosomes are the molecular machines responsible for translating genetic information into proteins. Understanding where they work inside a eukaryotic cell comes down to one simple rule: destination determines location. Proteins destined for use inside the cytoplasm are made by free ribosomes drifting in the cytoplasm. Proteins bound for export, the plasma membrane, or lysosomes are made by ribosomes docked onto the rough endoplasmic reticulum. Lysosomes themselves contain no ribosomes. The enzymes inside them are shipped there after being made on the rough ER. The rough endoplasmic reticulum gets its bumpy appearance precisely because ribosomes are studded along its surface. Meanwhile, free ribosomes handle all proteins that stay and work inside the cytoplasm. The choice of location is not random. A signal sequence at the start of the growing protein recruits a signal recognition particle, which pauses translation and docks the ribosome onto the rough ER. Without that signal, the ribosome stays free and the finished protein remains in the cytoplasm. Ribosomes are not fixed to one place. The same subunits can serve in either location. Anchor this to one question: where does this protein need to go? That answer tells you exactly which ribosome population is doing the work. Question 36. Which of the following is the correct overall summary of the photosynthesis reaction? Your options are: A. Glucose plus oxygen yields carbon dioxide. B. Carbon dioxide plus oxygen yields glucose. C. Glucose plus water yields oxygen. D. Carbon dioxide plus water yields glucose. What's your answer? commit to one before I continue. The correct answer is D. Carbon dioxide plus water yields glucose. D is correct because photosynthesis uses carbon dioxide and water along with light energy captured by chlorophyll to produce glucose and release oxygen. This summarizes the overall conversion of light energy into chemical energy stored in plants. A is wrong because the summary describes cellular respiration, in which glucose and oxygen are consumed and carbon dioxide, water, and energy are released. It is the reverse of the photosynthesis reaction shown in the correct option. B is wrong because photosynthesis does not use oxygen as a starting material. The reactants of photosynthesis are carbon dioxide, water, and light energy, while oxygen is one of the products released into the atmosphere by green plants. C is wrong because this summary is missing light energy as an input and reverses several reactants and products. Photosynthesis builds glucose using carbon dioxide and water with light energy, producing oxygen as a byproduct of the reaction. Photosynthesis is how plants, algae, and certain bacteria convert light energy into chemical energy stored in glucose. It's also the source of nearly all free oxygen in Earth's atmosphere, making aerobic life possible. Inside the chloroplast, photosynthesis runs in two coupled stages. The light-dependent reactions occur in the thylakoid membranes, where chlorophyll absorbs photons and splits water, releasing oxygen. The Calvin cycle then runs in the stroma, using that energy to fix carbon dioxide into glucose. The summary equation is straightforward. Carbon dioxide and water are the reactants. Light energy drives the conversion, and glucose and oxygen are the products. Getting the direction right is the key exam skill. The most common confusion is mixing up photosynthesis and cellular respiration. They involve the same molecules running in reverse. The cleanest separator is energy direction. Photosynthesis stores energy, respiration releases it. If a stem mentions glucose breakdown or oxygen consumption, that's respiration. Anchor photosynthesis to its direction. Light energy and carbon dioxide going in, glucose and oxygen coming out. Flip that arrow and you have cellular respiration. Keep the direction clear and the exam question answers itself. Question 37. Which hormone is secreted by the pancreas and lowers blood glucose levels after a meal? Your options are A. Insulin, B. Glucagon, C. Cortisol, D. Epinephrine. Pick one. Trust your gut. Here's your chance to test yourself. The correct answer is A. Insulin. A is correct because insulin is secreted by beta cells of the pancreatic islets after meals. It lowers blood glucose by promoting glucose uptake into muscle and adipose cells and by stimulating glycogen formation in the liver. B is wrong because glucagon is secreted by alpha cells of the pancreas during fasting. It raises blood glucose by stimulating glycogen breakdown and gluconeogenesis in the liver, opposing the action of insulin during the postprandial period. C is wrong because cortisol is a glucocorticoid produced by the adrenal cortex during stress. It tends to raise blood glucose by promoting gluconeogenesis and reducing peripheral glucose uptake, opposing the glucose-lowering effect of insulin. D is wrong because epinephrine is released by the adrenal medulla during stress and exercise. It increases blood glucose by stimulating glycogen breakdown and inhibits insulin release, which is the opposite of lowering blood sugar. The pancreas plays two distinct roles in nutrient processing. Its exocrine tissue releases digestive enzymes into the gut, while its endocrine islets of Langerhans secrete hormones directly into the bloodstream to regulate what happens to nutrients after absorption. Within the pancreas, small clusters called islets of Langerhans are scattered through the larger exocrine tissue. Beta cells inside the islets produce insulin, while neighboring alpha cells produce glucagon, two hormones with opposite effects on blood glucose. After a carbohydrate-rich meal, blood glucose climbs rapidly. Beta cells detect the rise and release insulin in a biphasic burst. The liver, skeletal muscle, and adipose tissue respond by absorbing glucose, and within about 2 hours, blood glucose returns to its fasting level. 4 hormones regulate blood glucose, but only insulin lowers it. Glucagon from pancreatic alpha cells, cortisol from the adrenal cortex, and epinephrine from the adrenal medulla all raise blood glucose. On the exam, insulin stands alone as the single glucose-lowering hormone. When a test stem mentions lowering blood glucose, beta cells, or glycogen synthesis after a meal, the answer is insulin. When it mentions raising blood glucose or breaking down glycogen, think glucagon, cortisol, or epinephrine. Direction of effect is the cleanest way to keep these hormones straight. Question 38. Which of the following best describes an electric current? Your options are A. Temperature of a wire at rest, B. Pressure of gas molecules, C. Flow of charge through a conductor, D. Bending of light at a boundary. Which would you go with? Lock it in before the reveal. The correct answer is C. Flow of charge through a conductor. C is correct because electric current is the flow of electric charge through a conductor in any circuit during operation. In metal wires, the charge flow consists primarily of electrons drifting in response to an applied voltage. A is wrong because wire temperature relates to the thermal energy stored in the wire and to resistive heating during use, not to current. Current involves the actual movement of charge carriers rather than the heat content. B is wrong because gas pressure describes how strongly gas molecules push against the walls of any container holding the gas. It is unrelated to the electrical concept of moving charge through a conducting material, Na. D is wrong because light bending at a boundary between two media is refraction, which is an optical phenomenon governed by changes in light speed. It is not at all related to the flow of electric charge. Electric current is the flow of electric charge through a conductor. In metal wires, free electrons drift in response to an applied electric field. And by convention, we describe current direction as the direction positive charge would flow, opposite to the electrons. A historical artifact, not a physical law. The ampere is defined as 1 coulomb of charge passing a fixed point every second. In metal conductors, the actual carriers are free electrons, but conventional current points the other way. A sign convention every physicist and engineer uses without confusion. Inside the wire, the electric field points from the positive terminal toward the negative terminal, pushing free electrons in the opposite direction. The net movement of those electrons is what we call current, real charge doing real work as it moves through the circuit. Ohm's law ties these three together. Voltage equals current times resistance. Raise the voltage across a fixed resistance and current increases proportionally. Raise the resistance at fixed voltage and current falls. Current is the quantity that actually accomplishes work. Without it, voltage and resistance are just abstract numbers. The most tested confusion is current versus voltage. Voltage is the electrical pressure that exists even in an open circuit. Current is the flow that only happens when the circuit is complete. Multiplying current by voltage gives power, the rate at which energy is delivered or consumed anywhere in that circuit. Question 39. Hypertension is often called the silent killer because most patients have no symptoms until organ damage appears. Routine measurement at clinic visits is the only reliable way to detect it early. Without treatment, persistent high blood pressure damages arteries and increases risk for stroke, heart attack, and kidney failure. According to the passage, why is hypertension called the silent killer? Your options are it causes immediate severe pain. B, it can only be detected at home. C, it always leads to kidney failure. D, it usually has no early symptoms. Don't overthink it. Which one feels right? The correct answer is D. It usually has no early symptoms. D is correct because the passage directly states that most patients have no symptoms until organ damage appears, which is precisely what makes the disease silent in the writer's framing and answers the question the stem poses. A is wrong because the passage states that most patients have no symptoms until organ damage appears, which is the opposite of immediate severe pain and contradicts the very reason the writer offers for the silent killer label. B is wrong because the passage names routine clinic measurement as the reliable way to detect hypertension early, so claiming home detection only as the sole route reverses the writer's actual recommendation about screening. C is wrong because kidney failure appears in the passage as one possible outcome of untreated disease, not as a guaranteed result, and using always overstates a hedged claim and fails any careful supporting detail check. Hypertension earns its nickname not because it is rare or dramatic, but because it causes no warning symptoms for years, sometimes decades. Understanding why requires looking at how blood pressure actually rises and how the body responds. The body's adaptations are the key. Resistance vessels stiffen. The heart quietly increases its workload. And, critically, the brain has no mechanism to sense elevated pressure the way it senses pain. Each adaptation is invisible, and together they mask the problem completely. When the body's adaptive capacity is finally exceeded, the consequences appear all at once, in the heart, brain, kidneys, and eyes. Hypertensive heart disease, stroke, chronic kidney disease, and retinopathy are often the first signs a patient or clinician notices, long after the pressure has been damaging those organs. A simple blood pressure cuff applied at a routine clinic visit can catch hypertension before any organ damage occurs. Reproducible elevated readings confirm the diagnosis, and treatment with diet, exercise, and medication can normalize pressure, preventing the downstream harm that would otherwise unfold silently. The silent killer label exists precisely because patients feel fine while damage accumulates. Routine measurement is what interrupts that hidden progression. On a supporting detail question, always mirror the passage's specific explanation. Here, the absence of early symptoms. Question 4. What is the antecedent of the underlying pronoun she in this sentence? The patient said that she felt better after the second dose of medication. Your options are A. Dose, B. Patient, C. She, D. Felt. Got a guess? Lock it in. The correct answer is B. Patient. B is correct because patient is the antecedent because it is the noun that the pronoun she replaces. The pronoun must agree with patient in number, person, and gender, and patient appears immediately before she in this sentence. A is wrong because dose is a noun appearing later in the sentence inside a prepositional phrase. It is not the noun that the pronoun she replaces or refers back to, since the pronoun appears earlier than dose. C is wrong because she is the pronoun in question, not its antecedent. A pronoun cannot be its own antecedent. Since the antecedent is the noun the pronoun stands for and must come before the pronoun grammatically here. D is wrong because felt is a verb in the dependent clause expressing the action of the pronoun. Verbs cannot serve as antecedents because antecedents must be nouns or pronouns, not actions or states of being in sentences. Every pronoun needs a noun to stand in for. That noun is called the antecedent. The antecedent must appear before the pronoun and agree with it in number, person, and gender. These two rules are the foundation of antecedent identification. Finding an antecedent takes 3 checks. The candidate must be a noun. It must agree with the pronoun and number, person, and gender, and it must appear before the pronoun. The first noun that passes all 3 is your antecedent. In the sentence, the patient said that she felt better. The pronoun she points backward to patient, the closest preceding noun that is singular and fits in gender. Position and agreement together lock in the relationship. Test writers build distractors around 4 failure patterns: a noun that appears after the pronoun, a verb mistaken for a noun, the pronoun treating itself as its own antecedent, and a noun that simply fails the agreement check. Ruling these out leaves the correct answer. Anchor every antecedent question to 2 rules. The word must come before the pronoun, and it must agree in number, person, and gender. Apply those filters in order, and the answer becomes straightforward every time. Question 41. What is the complete subject of the following sentence? The new charge nurse on the night shift updated the staffing schedule before report. Your options are A. SIP, B. Nurse, C. Charge nurse, D. The new charge nurse. Which one is it? Pause the video if you need more time. The correct answer is D. The new charge nurse. D is correct because the complete subject includes every word that identifies who or what performs the verb. So it covers the article, the adjective new, and the compound noun charge nurse together as one full unit. A is wrong because there is only the article that begins the noun phrase. The complete subject includes the article and every word that modifies the simple subject nurse before the main verb of the sentence here. B is wrong because nurse alone is the simple subject, but the question asks for the complete subject, which includes all words attached to nurse before the verb. The simple subject is only one word in this sentence. C is wrong because charge nurse names part of the subject, yet it omits the article and the descriptive adjective new that further identify which charge nurse acted. The complete subject must include all those modifying words. Every sentence can be split into 2 parts, the subject and the predicate. Understanding the difference between the simple subject and the complete subject is a core skill in sentence analysis. The simple subject is just the bare noun, one word. The complete subject wraps that noun in everything attached to it before the verb, articles, adjectives, and prepositional phrases. The boundary between the complete subject and the predicate falls at the main verb. Take this example. The new charge nurse on the night shift updated the staffing schedule. The simple subject is just nurse. The complete subject is the entire phrase. The new charge nurse on the night shift, capturing every modifier attached to that noun before the verb. The level of detail you need depends on the task. For subject-verb agreement, the simple subject is what matters. The verb agrees with the bare noun, not its modifiers. For diagramming or full structural analysis, the complete subject matters. On a test, reading the stem carefully tells you which version is being asked for. When a test stem asks for the complete subject, include every modifier, articles, adjectives, prepositional phrases, everything attached to the noun before the verb. When it asks for the simple subject, give only the bare noun. Question 42. Which type of fermentation in human muscle cells produces lactic acid when oxygen is limited? Your options are A. Lactic acid fermentation, B. Alcoholic fermentation, C. Photosynthesis, D. Krebs cycle. Take a second. Which answer would you pick? The correct answer is A. Lactic acid fermentation. A is correct because lactic acid fermentation occurs in human muscle cells during intense exercise when oxygen is limited. Pyruvate from glycolysis is converted into lactic acid, which regenerates NAD+, so glycolysis can continue producing some ATP. B is wrong because alcoholic fermentation produces ethanol and carbon dioxide and occurs in yeast and some bacteria. Human muscle cells do not produce ethanol during low oxygen conditions, so this is not the correct pathway in this case. C is wrong because photosynthesis is the process by which plants make glucose using light energy, carbon dioxide, and water. It does not occur in human muscle cells and has no role in handling pyruvate when oxygen. D is wrong because the Krebs cycle is part of aerobic respiration that occurs only when oxygen is available. When oxygen is limited, the Krebs cycle slows or stops and cells switch to fermentation instead to keep. When oxygen runs short, cells can't use their mitochondrial pathways, but they still need ATP. Fermentation is the metabolic workaround that keeps energy production going under anaerobic conditions. The core job of fermentation is simple. Recycle NADH back into NAD+. Glycolysis consumes NAD+, and if that oxidized carrier depletes, the whole pathway stalls. Fermentation donates those electrons back to pyruvate, freeing NAD+, and keeping glycolysis churning. Different organisms use different fermentation routes, but all serve the same NAD+ regeneration purpose. Human muscle relies on lactate dehydrogenase to reduce pyruvate to lactate. Yeast instead decarboxylate pyruvate and produce ethanol and carbon dioxide. A completely different end product, found in yeast, not human cells. During intense exercise, oxygen demand outpaces supply. Mitochondria slow down and pyruvate backs up. Lactate dehydrogenase converts that pyruvate to lactate, regenerating NAD+ in the process. The lactate diffuses into the blood and travels to the liver, where it's reconverted to glucose during recovery. When a test stem says muscle cells, intense exercise, or anaerobic conditions, the answer is lactic acid fermentation producing lactate. If the stem mentions ethanol or carbon dioxide, that's yeast. All fermentations regenerate NAD+. They just differ in what they make along the way. Question 43. Which type of blood vessel typically carries blood away from the heart toward body tissues? Your options are A. Vein, B. Artery, C. Venule, D. Capillary. Before I reveal it, which one do you think is right? The correct answer is B. Artery. B is correct because arteries carry blood away from the heart to body tissues. They have thick, muscular, and elastic walls that withstand the high pressures generated by ventricular contraction and help propel blood forward during diastole. A is wrong because veins carry blood toward the heart from peripheral tissues. They have thinner walls than arteries and contain valves that help prevent backflow of blood, especially in the limbs against the pull of gravity. C is wrong because venules are small veins that drain capillary beds. They merge into larger veins and carry blood toward the heart, not away from it. So they do not match the description in the question. D is wrong because capillaries are tiny vessels that connect arterioles to venules. They are the site of exchange between blood and tissues, where oxygen, nutrients, and waste diffuse, rather than a primary direction of blood flow. The cardiovascular system is a closed loop, and the three vessel types each occupy a distinct role in it. Understanding how each vessel is named, built, and where it sits in the loop is the foundation for every related question. The naming convention is purely directional relative to the heart. Arteries carry blood away from the heart. Veins carry blood toward the heart. Capillaries sit between the two, connecting arterioles to venules, and are the actual sites of gas and nutrient exchange with tissues. Wall structure directly reflects the pressure environment each vessel operates in. Arteries face the full force of ventricular contraction, so they are built with thick, elastic, Muscular walls and use elastic recoil to smooth the pulse. Veins operate at low, steady pressure and rely on valves to prevent backflow, especially against gravity in the limbs. From the left ventricle, oxygenated blood enters the aorta and travels through major arteries, the carotids, subclavians, renals, and iliacs, each branching down to arterioles, and finally into capillary beds. After exchange, blood drains into venules, then veins, and returns to the heart. The critical exam nuance is the pulmonary exception. Pulmonary arteries carry deoxygenated blood away from the right ventricle to the lungs, while pulmonary veins carry oxygenated blood back to the left atrium. The oxygen content is reversed from the systemic pattern, but the directional rule never changes. Artery always means away from the heart. Vein always means toward it. Question 44. Hand hygiene remains the single most effective defense against hospital-acquired infections. Decades of research show that simple soap and water or alcohol rubbed before and after patient contact reduces transmission of resistant bacteria. Yet, observational studies routinely find that healthcare workers comply with hygiene protocols fewer than half the times they should. What is the main idea of the passage? Your options are: A. Soap is better than alcohol-based rub. B. Hospital infections cost billions yearly. C. Hand hygiene works but compliance lags. D. Workers should be fined for non-compliance. What's your answer? Commit to one before I continue. The correct answer is C. Hand hygiene works but compliance lags. C is correct because the passage establishes hygiene's effectiveness, then pivots to the disappointing compliance rate, and a faithful main idea must capture both halves of that contrast in one tight statement that mirrors the writer's emphasis. A is wrong because the passage does not compare soap with alcohol rub or rank one above the other. So naming a winner introduces a comparison the writer never sets up and misses the central tension the excerpt develops. B is wrong because no dollar figure appears anywhere in the excerpt, and even if cost was stated, it would only support the larger argument about effectiveness paired with poor compliance rather than serve as the integrating claim itself. D is wrong because fines are nowhere proposed in the passage, and adding a punitive recommendation goes beyond what the writer actually claims about the compliance shortfall the excerpt describes for staff working on the unit. Some passages are built around attention, a practice that works well paired with a problem in how it is actually carried out. Understanding how writers structure this kind of contrast is the key to finding the real main idea. The writer's integrating claim is never just one side. It sits at the conjunction of both. The practice is sana, yet real-world adherence is insufficient. Capturing only one half misses what the writer was actually arguing. Writers signal the second half of the contrast with pivot words. When you spot yet, however, but, despite, although, or even though you have found the structural turn, the integrating claim spans everything on both sides of that pivot. Think of it like a bridge with two towers but a missing span in the middle. One tower is the strength of the practice, proven, evidence-based. The other is real-world compliance. The gap between them is exactly what the passage is about, and a faithful main idea answer names that gap. On exam day, anchor your main idea check to one question. Does this answer represent both halves of the contrast? If it captures only effectiveness or only the compliance failure, it is incomplete, no matter how prominently that half appeared in the passage. Question 40. Which structure is normally the natural pacemaker of the heart? Your options are A. Atrioventricular node, B. Bundle of His, C. Purkinje fibers, D. Sinoatrial node. Pick one. Trust your gut. Here's your chance to test yourself. The correct answer is D, sinoatrial node. D is correct because the sinoatrial node, located in the wall of the right atrium near the entry of the superior vena cava, is the natural pacemaker. It spontaneously generates impulses that determine the resting heart rate. A is wrong because the atrioventricular node delays the impulse before it passes from the atria to the ventricles, giving the atria time to empty. It can act as a backup pacemaker but does not normally initiate each heartbeat. B is wrong because the bundle of His conducts impulses from the atrioventricular node into the interventricular septum and then to bundle branches. It transmits signals quickly through the heart but does not normally generate them on its own. C is wrong because Purkinje fibers spread the impulse rapidly through the ventricular walls, causing coordinated and forceful ventricular contraction. They distribute the signal but do not normally generate the rhythm that determines the heart rate. The heart's electrical conduction system is a hierarchy of specialized cells that initiates and propagates every heartbeat. These cells don't contract, they generate and transmit signals. 5 named structures form this hierarchy: the sinoatrial node, the atrioventricular node, the bundle of His, the bundle branches, and the Purkinje fibers. The sinoatrial node sits at the top and serves as the heart's natural pacemaker. The impulse travels from the sinoatrial node through the atrial walls into the atrioventricular node, which briefly delays it to allow ventricular filling. It then races down the bundle of His, splits into the bundle branches, and spreads across the ventricles through the Purkinje fibers for coordinated contraction. All conduction structures can depolarize spontaneously, but the fastest pacemaker wins. The SA node fires first at 60 to 100 beats per minute, suppressing the others. The AV node takes over at 40 to 60 BPM, only if the SA node fails, and the Purkinje fibers act as a last resort at even slower rates. The cleanest way to distinguish the two nodes is by function and location. The sinoatrial node sits in the right atrium near the superior vena cava and starts each heartbeat. The atrioventricular node sits at the atrial ventricular junction and delays the impulse. It never initiates one under normal conditions. Question 46. A red blood cell placed in pure water will most likely undergo which of the following changes? Your options are: A. Swell and burst as water enters. B. Shrivel as water leaves. C. Stay the same size. D. Divide into 2 daughter cells. Which would you go with? Lock it in before the reveal. The correct answer is A. Swell and burst as water enters. A is correct because pure water has fewer dissolved solutes than the inside of a red blood cell, making the surroundings hypertonic. Water moves into the cell by osmosis, causing the cell to swell and eventually burst. B is wrong because cells shrivel when placed in a hypertonic solution, which has more solids than the cell. Pure water has very few solutes, so the cell takes in water rather than losing it outward. C is wrong because a cell stays the same size in an isotonic solution, where solid concentrations are equal inside and outside the cell. Pure water is hypertonic to the cell, so the cell cannot stay constant. D is wrong because osmotic stress does not cause a red blood cell to undergo division. Mature red blood cells in humans cannot divide because they lack a nucleus and the machinery required to copy DNA during cell division. Osmosis is the passive movement of water across a selectively permeable membrane, driven by concentration gradients. No cellular energy required. Water always moves from where it is more concentrated to where it is less concentrated, until equilibrium is reached or the membrane stops it. The solutar concentration of the surrounding environment determines what happens to a cell. In an isotonic solution, the cell stays the same size. In a hypertonic solution, water rushes in and the cell swells. In a hypertonic solution, water leaves and the cell shrinks. Pure water is hypertonic to a red blood cell because the cytoplasm contains dissolved proteins, ions, and metabolites. Water rushes inward down its concentration gradient. Because red blood cells lack a rigid cell wall, they swell uncontrollably until the membrane ruptures, a process called hemolysis. It is easy to confuse osmosis with related processes. The cleaner separator is the molecule involved. Osmosis is exclusively about water crossing a selectively permeable membrane. General diffusion applies to any molecule. Active transport requires energy input and moves substances against their gradient. On exam questions, identify the relative solute concentrations, determine which direction water will move, and predict the cellular consequence. Pure water is always hypertonic. Water enters, the cell swells, and without a cell wall, it bursts. Question 47. Which of the following best describes the Doppler effect? Your options are a reflection from a curved mirror, B. Bending of light through a lens, C. Frequency shift from relative motion, D. Splitting of white light into colors. Don't overthink it. Which one feels right? The correct answer is C. Frequency shift from relative motion. C is correct because the Doppler effect is the apparent change in frequency observed when a wave source and observer move relative to each other through space. The motion causes higher or lower perceived pitch of sound. A is wrong because reflection from a curved mirror is described by the laws of reflection and the geometry of curved surfaces in optics. It does not involve any frequency change due to relative motion between source. B is wrong because bending of light through a lens is refraction, which is governed by changes in the speed of light in different media. Refraction is not the same phenomenon as the Doppler effect, which involves. D is wrong because the splitting of white light into its component colors is dispersion, which occurs when different wavelengths refract by different amounts. Dispersion happens through a prism or other transparent medium and is unrelated to. The Doppler effect describes how the frequency of a wave appears to change when its source and an observer are moving relative to each other. This is a fundamental wave phenomenon that applies to both sound and light. When a source moves toward you, wavefronts bunch together and arrive more frequently, raising the observed pitch. When it moves away, wavefronts stretch out, arriving less often and lowering the pitch. No relative motion means no Doppler shift at all. This is exactly what happens with an ambulance siren. As it approaches, compressed wavefronts produce a higher pitch. The moment it passes and recedes, the wavefronts stretch out and the pitch drops. A shift dramatic enough that almost everyone has heard it firsthand. The key exam distinction is that only the Doppler effect involves a frequency shift caused by relative motion. Reflection, refraction, and dispersion all occur with completely stationary sources and observers. None of them shift frequency through motion. Whenever a question mentions approaching or receding sources, pitch change, red shift, blue shift, or ultrasound flow imaging, relative motion is the cause and the Doppler effect is the answer. No motion, no Doppler. That single rule keeps it cleanly distinct from every other wave behavior. Question 48. The Diabetes Prevention Program enrolled adults at high risk for type 2 diabetes. Participants assigned to a lifestyle group lost moderate weight and increased physical activity. Over the trial period, the lifestyle group reduced new diabetes cases by 58% compared with placebo. A metformin group reduced cases by 31%. According to the passage, by what percentage did the lifestyle group reduce new cases? Your options are A. 31%, B. 58%, C. 90%, D. 100%. Got a guess? Lock it in. The correct answer is B, 58%. B is correct because the passage directly states that the lifestyle group reduced new diabetes cases by 58% compared with placebo, which is exactly the figure the question asks for. So this option matches the supporting detail. A is wrong because the 31% figure in the passage belongs to the metformin group, not the lifestyle group. So picking it confuses the two arms of the trial that the writer carefully distinguishes for the reader. C is wrong because the 90% figure does not appear anywhere in this passage. So picking it imports a number the writer did not provide and fails the basic textual check that supporting detail items always require. D is wrong because the passage does not claim that any group eliminated diabetes entirely. So 100% overstates the trial results and contradicts the specific reduction figures the writer provides for both intervention arms. Supporting detail questions with numerical data test one precise skill: assigning the right number to the right group. The trap is never a made-up figure. It's a real number from the passage attached to the wrong context. In the diabetes prevention program, the lifestyle group achieved a 58% reduction in new diabetes cases, while the metformin group achieved 31%. Each figure is tied exclusively to one intervention arm, swapping the misattributes effectiveness entirely. Detail matching follows 3 steps. First, identify exactly what group or condition the stem is asking about. Second, scan the passage for that specific element. Third, match your answer choice to the number found in step 2. Certain signal phrases in a question stem almost always flag a supporting detail item. When you see according to the passage states, the writer mentions, or the text reports, your job is to locate a specific fact. But not interpret or infer. Before scanning the passage, underline the specific group or condition the stem names. That anchor keeps you from grabbing a familiar but mismatched number, the most common trap on numerical detail items. Question 49. Which sentence uses the subjunctive mood correctly? Sentence 1. If I am the supervisor, I would change the policy. Sentence 2. If I was the supervisor, I would change. Sentence 3. If I be the supervisor, I would change. Sentence 4. If I were the supervisor, I would change. Your options are A. Sentence 1, B. Sentence 2, C. Sentence 3, D. Sentence 4. Which one is it? Pause the video if you need more time. The correct answer is D. Sentence 4. D is correct because sentence 4 correctly uses were, the subjunctive form for hypothetical or contrary to fact statements, with the subject I were signals an unreal or imagined condition. The subjunctive is required after if in such cases. A is wrong because sentence 1 mixes present indicative am with the conditional would change, breaking tense agreement and failing to use the subjunctive form for the imagined condition. Hypothetical statements with if require the subjunctive mood instead. B is wrong because sentence 2 uses was, the indicative form. In formal grammar, hypothetical conditions following if require the subjunctive were, not the simple past indicative. The subjunctive is required for unreal or contrary to fact statements always. C is wrong because sentence 3 uses the bare infinitive be, which is incorrect for first-person hypothetical statements. The standard subjunctive form here is were not be. The base form be appears only in mandative subjunctive constructions normally. The subjunctive mood is a special verb form English reserves for conditions that are hypothetical, contrary to fact, or wishful, and for formal demands and recommendations. Understanding it means knowing when a condition is imagined versus when it actually happened. English has 3 grammatical moods. The indicative states facts. The imperative issues commands. The subjunctive signals that the condition being described is not real. It exists only in imagination or as a formal requirement. In modern English, the subjunctive survives in three main structures: hypothetical if clauses using were, mandative constructions after verbs like demand, suggest, and recommend, and a handful of fixed expressions. Standardized exams test all three, but focus heavily on the first. The single most tested contrast is with versus were. Use was for a past factual condition, something that really happened. Use were for a present or future hypothetical, something that is not true right now. That one swap is what the subjunctive looks like in practice. When you see an if clause on a test, ask one question: is this condition real or imagined? If it is hypothetical or contrary to fact, were is the formal subjunctive choice for first and third person singular subjects, and that choice will always be the correct answer. Question 50. Sleep was once described as a passive period of rest. Newer research shows the brain is highly active during deep sleep. Cerebrospinal fluid surges through brain tissue, flushing waste. Memories are consolidated and hormones for tissue repair are released in carefully timed bursts. Which choice best captures the main idea of the passage? Your options are: A. Sleep is mostly a period of inactivity. B. Sleep is biologically active maintenance work. C. Memory consolidation requires REM sleep specifically. D. Sleep hormones drive immune function alone. Take a second. Which answer would you pick? The correct answer is B. Sleep is biologically active maintenance work. B is correct because the passage corrects the old myth and replaces it with a list of active maintenance functions, and this option captures both the correction and its substance in one tight integrating statement for the reader. Is wrong because the passage directly rejects the inactivity view. So, an answer that affirms it contradicts the very correction the writer was making about how sleep should now be understood by an informed reader. C is wrong because REM sleep is not specified in the excerpt, and the passage attributes consolidation to deep sleep generally rather than singling out one specific stage of the larger nightly sleep cycle as essential. D is wrong because the immune system is not even named in this excerpt, and isolating any single hormonal function narrows the claim and drops the broader maintenance argument the passage gives equal weight to in its sentences. Some passages exist specifically to replace an outdated view with a better one. Understanding how these passages are structured is the key to finding their true main idea. Corrective passages follow a predictable rejection and replacement structure. The opening summarizes the older view for context, a pivot word, like however, in fact, or actually signals the turn, and the body of the passage develops the new, corrected view, which is the integrating claim. The integrating claim is the corrected view that the entire body of the passage supports. Supporting examples, it's like a single biological function to evidence for that claim, not the claim itself. The pivot is where the writer's real assertion begins. Wrong answer options in these questions fall into three traps: restating the rejected old view, naming just one supporting example instead of the broader claim, or importing a topic the passage never addresses. Only the option capturing the active corrected view is faithful to the writer's emphasis. Whenever you spot a pivot word, recognize that everything before it is context and everything after it is what the writer is actually asserting. Anchor your main idea answer to the corrected view and treat specific examples as supporting evidence beneath it.
You have reached the end of our study video for the free complete exam preparation. Visit our website link in the description, and you can find thousands of practice questions and comprehensive study guides on our website. Thank you for studying with us today. See you in the next video.